Today's topic is the Genesis account that claims there was a perfect original world. Now there are two states that are recorded in Scripture, two conditions of our universe. The first was a perfect world, the second was a fallen world. We're familiar with the second state. It's a reality. No one will dispute this. It's just that Christians and non-Christians find the first perfect world as difficult to accept. Now, the extent of these two states embraced or encompassed the whole of creation, not just the Garden of Eden. Romans 8 is quite clear on that it included the whole catalogue of created orders and spheres listed in Genesis. Now, we could say that we can harmonise this with science by claiming that this is a literary device to have an ideal situation placed alongside an actual situation to make a theological point. And there's good foundation for saying this. Joshua and Judges are books that are parallel. One describes a rapid conquest of Israel, the other claims it was very slow and difficult. Genesis 10 and 11 are two chapters that are similar. One describes the dispersion of humans peacefully according to their languages, and chapter 11 describes that people had one language, but God confused their languages as a reprisal or judgment for their sin of building the Tower of Babel. Now, the theological point is, in the first example, is that God was faithful in granting the land to Israel, and in the second, that Genesis 10 was also fulfilling the command to populate the world. Perhaps Genesis 1 and 2 are similar to the ideal account. There was harmony with animals and people, or Adam getting on well, and Adam and Eve certainly weren't ashamed. They weren't clothed, and they seemed to have a relationship of innocence. Then we have a darker picture following the fall. As we move through Genesis, animals are killed to clothe humans, and Adam and Eve are blaming each other for their sin. Now, obviously, the theological point made is that evil does not come from God. He didn't make an evil creation or evil within creation. It originated in the created order itself. Now, we might ask ourselves, was it a literary device that the author used, or was this really a true state of the original universe? We can moderate our views about the original utopia. There was death. Seeds fall into the ground and die so they can grow. This is what Jesus said. Perhaps there was predation prior to the flood. Jesus said people were feasting, and in the Greek it implies they were eating meat. There was livestock farming, animal sacrifice, and there was certainly no dietary permission from God to do this until the flood. So we might ask ourselves, if people were predating, were animals predating before the flood and before the fall? So some people would say that animals were created as predators, but their behaviour changed to predation only after the fall. This might cause a little bit of confusion amongst us, saying, well, why did God make predators who behaved like herbivores? So it puts God's design into question. So perhaps there was predation in the original creation. So how can we resolve this? Well, we turn back to our example where we have science and scripture intersect, and we know that our solar system is attributed to God in its creation and its movement, that's not very scientific. But the observations we make, or we have in Scripture, are correct. The sky is blue, the sun does rise and set, and the earth doesn't feel like it's moving. So these are correct and true observations, but we know that they're not scientific. So there are no laws of science, because it's God who causes everything to happen, and God and the way He causes things to happen transcends science. So science really cannot accurately measure whether Scripture is true or not, because it's measuring things that are going beyond what science looks at. So if it's true for biblical astronomy, well, it will be true for biblical creation as well. What was observed is correct, but it's not scientific. So we can't go back in time and look at Scripture through the eyes of our modern science, because there's no scientific laws we're examining in Scripture. So in conclusion, we can say that there was a literal universe at the time of Adam and Eve, free of decay and death. However, it's not scientific laws that have been recorded, so we can't construct an alternative narrative or creation science, just as we can't do it for astronomy, because the church tried and failed. By the same token, science really isn't the best way to measure or judge Scripture. Just as well the reverse is true. We can't judge science whether it's true or not if it agrees or disagrees with the Bible. The truth is both are correct, because we have examples in the Bible that show it is correct, and we know that science is correct. Comparing the two doesn't do justice to either of the accounts. We are not also setting up two different perspectives, like a dualism. It's not fair. They're both realities. But checking whether one reality is true or not using the measure of science isn't fair and isn't right to try and reconcile the two. If Scripture was an account with a long list of scientific laws to explain how our earth was created, our universe was created, and what state it was in, then we could do that legitimately and fairly. As it is, we have two accounts, and they are both correct, and we can have confidence in both.